Good afternoon, fight fans. Welcome to the Fights Gone By podcast number 18. I'm your host, Jack Slack, King of Jesters and Jester to the King. And today we're going to be talking about not the fights that just happened. Well, I'll touch on them briefly, actually, before we get started. But today we're going to do something a little bit more interesting. I fell behind on answering questions, so we are going to do a rapid-fire Q&A. I'm going to be going through my Facebook and my Twitter, answering questions that people are sending in right now as I record this. So what happened that was interesting this weekend? There was a card in Melbourne. UFC went there, took almost no name power. Main event was Brunson versus Whittaker. Really, really sloppy fight. We talked about Brunson's tendency to run forward with his chin out when he's throwing his left hand. And he just took that and turned it up to 11. That was literally all he was doing for most of the fight. And then diving after legs from, 4 feet out. It was really, really bad. In terms of technique, it made for an exciting fight. And Whittaker, trying to be the more technical man, but getting, hurried into a brawl most of the time, it eventually paid off. And he was able to chin Brunson coming in, close his eye up, and then throw a head kick and knock him out. Terrific stuff, in the worst way. What else was interesting from that card? Sohee Ham Delay, she fought Danielle Taylor, who is tiny and has the legs of a running back. She's got a real disparity between her upper and lower body. It's like one of those flick books you give to children where you change the upper, middle, and the head, the body, and the legs. And she's got the legs from someone in, I don't know, maybe Benson Henderson or someone like that. That fight was, it was all right. But what you saw in that fight was that Danielle Taylor had no idea how to hand fight. Sohee Ham was actually holding her arm for long periods of that fight. And Sohee Ham doesn't have a weapon on her right side. Taylor just wheeled around the ring that way. Sorry, the cage that way. And got away from a lot of the damage. Yeah, two very limited fighters, but, decent fight. Ben Nguyen put on the... Ben Nguyen, yeah. Ben Nguyen put on the most interesting striking performance, I thought. Looked a lot more Dominic Cruzy than he normally does. Lots of stuff out in the open. Was trying to bump off to the side and throw the long uppercut. Dominic Cruz style. Got caught a couple of times, but also landed a few, so that was interesting. Katie Taylor went professional by fighting, I don't like calling people bums, but this person was obviously brought in to lose. She was 7-14. And then, obviously, the Irish press are just all over it like it was a stunning performance. They're like, well, no, this lass has been beating up the best amateurs in the world for however many years, and has now decided to go pro. The thing about Lomachenko is that he broke the mold in going pro. He didn't do all the bums for years. He went straight into world title shots. And he had an early loss as a result, but now he's had like 8-9 fights, and he's considered one of the best in the world as a professional. When you've got that many amateur fights, it gives you such an advantage when you get in the ring, because you're fighting multiple guys on any day, could be anyone, so you're really good at adapting and making your style fit to whoever you're up against, and doing it on the fly. And you've got amazing comfort under fire because you're doing so many rounds so regularly. This could go two ways. Katie Taylor could get into a title shot soon, or she could hang around for ages fighting nobodies in women's boxing, which is already not a very strong pool of talent. But knowing the way that Irish fans are firstly about Taylor, and secondly about bandwagons, if I learned anything recently from Irish fans that I've talked to, and just Irish people generally, it's that they love a good bandwagon. I think Katie Taylor could fight nobodies until she's 35 and people would still pay to see it. However, there is no argument that girl has hands. She just lit up this lass she was against, got the KO. Only the second KO loss of that girl's career, so that was pretty cool. But, not really worth your time if you've seen Katie Taylor fight before, against decent opponents. And then Lomachenko wasn't doing so much of his usual angling off stuff. He was doing a lot of straight line stuff, which is, not particularly unusual. He does a lot of things. He's very good at a lot of different things. But lots of in and out, and there was some lovely stuff where he shoulder feinted a left hand and then moved away, and then he bounced in and feinted a left hand and bounced out. And just as Walters dropped his hands, he bounced back in and hammered him with a double left hand. The guy has just so many little subtleties in his game. He's absolutely remarkable. He's one of the best I've ever seen, and I'm not saying that lightly. I mean, he's one of the best I've ever seen as a boxer. And, MMA fighters could learn tons from his, particularly his turning techniques, which he didn't really use that much in this fight. The sad thing about that fight was that just as it was getting warmed up, Walters quit. And, it's hard to take it out on a fighter like that, but to be the big puncher and to not... He wasn't... there was no point where he was looking really hurt or taking a lot of punches. He just looked like he was struggling to catch Lomachenko. Lomachenko hadn't really landed that much powerful offense or even in combination. And Walters quit. So, he's going to have trouble with that stigma for a while. And it was very disappointing because the fight was just getting warmed up. And Walters has this reputation for power in any round, basically. He starched Nonito Donaire with basically glancing shots. Because, firstly, Nonito Donaire is a little bit on the way down, but he's a fast dude, and he can be pretty elusive when he wants to be. And Walters just laid him out. So, it would have been fun to keep that going for a few more rounds. He wasn't in danger of being hurt. It seemed more like frustration than anything else. Which made for a frustrating watch. No more interesting fights to talk about from this weekend. Let's talk questions. From Austin, do you bet? What is your record like? I have bet on fights about 3 times in the last 10 years, I think. It's probably more than 10 years because the first one I'm thinking of is Gabriel Gonzaga. I bet on him to beat Randy Couture because I was caught up in the hype of the Cro Cop win and really wasn't thinking it through. Gonzaga was a man mountain, and at the time it was like, wow, okay, this guy could actually be something special. And then it turned out that, he didn't really have the heart for this business. And Randy Couture was just a much better fighter. What do you think the biggest sticking point for the growth of the UFC is today? And has the lack of competition helped or hurt the organization since the Strikeforce and WEC deals? That's a tricky one. I think it depends on how much more the WME, IMG, William Morris Enterprise, or whatever they are, Entertainment. Depends how much they're willing to keep throwing money into this and putting themselves in the hole, taking out more loans and debts and things. Obviously, debt is a big thing to business. It's better to, if big companies are borrowing all the time. So it's not a big deal that they borrowed some money to make the 4.2 billion deal. It's just, if you do the maths in a very simple way, like a lot of us fans will, it's going to take a long time to recoup $4.2 billion. I think they've got to be willing to just keep expanding and keep pushing. Dana White had his whole world domination thing, and that really sort of dropped off in the last couple of years. They completely gave up on Macau. They've gone back to the Philippines now, which is quite cool. But I think the most annoying thing as an MMA fan is knowing what a massive market there is in Russia. There are so many incredible fighters out there, and a lot of them are wasting their time in KSW or M1 or Bellator, or they're giving up fighting altogether and becoming knights, putting on the armor and fighting in M1, or working for what's his name, the thug in charge of Chechnya. He famously hires MMA fighters as goons, basically. Apparently, allegedly. Yeah, I think willingness to go into Russia is a big deal, but then of course, there's all sorts of stuff in Russia that we're not really certain on. Might have to make some uncomfortable deals there. Whereas, of course, in Las Vegas, any deals with the devil were already done because Lorenzo Fertitta and Frank Fertitta had a long-standing business in Vegas, and Lorenzo had served on the athletic commission. Yeah, so I think the things holding them back will be not spending the money. I think you've got to go out and spend some cash to make things grow. It doesn't have to be your cash; it can be other people's cash, but you've actually got to spend some money to do that. I think sitting where they are and expecting to keep making the kind of returns just on Conor McGregor, because Conor McGregor and Ronda Rousey came along and saved 2015. They reversed the trend of downward pay-per-view buys, and that was very lucky that timed nicely, and the UFC then sold to WME. But this is a business where you want people to appreciate the brand rather than the two fighters that you have that are transcending the sport. Because Rousey left, and she's coming back for like one fight, but you don't have a certainty of future with McGregor. He's made all the money he could possibly want, and he's having kids, so who knows if he'll want to do this in 2 years' time. Another Austin says, what do you believe the biggest key to Lomachenko avoiding damage while on the inside, as he always does? ? Constant moving, angling. Controlling the head, he does a great job of that. You know, if someone gets in on him and he doesn't like it, he'll throw their head under one of his armpits and circle out. Just control of the head and moving his feet all the time, and knowing when to tie up if he needs to. But he doesn't tend to tie up that much. He's pretty good about that. Whereas someone like a Mayweather or a James Toney is more comfortable just clinching. What's the next big thing you want to see happen in MMA technique-wise? That's from my boy Kevin Lee. Way. Front kicks I'm always going to sing the praises of. Low kicks really have sort of dropped off lately because guys know how to check them and deal with them. I'd like to see more creative work with low kicks. I'd like to see some of the marching stuff you see from Muay Thai. You know, pick up the knee as if you're going to kick and then step down behind it. Joe Schilling is a fantastic example of that in kickboxing, and he also did it in MMA in his brief MMA career. More stepping knees, obviously a bit more dangerous when the guy can grab the leg and take you down. But, you know, Brandon Thatch had mad success with that. If you've got a good... if you're strong and you're good at digging underhooks and things like that, stepping knees are great for you. Generally, I'd say the guard passing in MMA is not... Well, I mean, I'm saying this to Kevin Lee, but, you know, Kevin Lee's got great guard passing. He was showing that against Mustayev the other night. But generally, the guard passing in MMA, not that polished. It's very rare that you see a nice guard pass, like or a combination of guard passes. If you watch a guy like Rodolfo Vieira or Andre Galvao, they hit ridiculous combinations of passes. And part of that is the gi, but they also do it in no gi too, so it's not completely necessary to have the gi grips. And I think some of this is rolling with the gloves. You know, if you're rolling with the gloves, you could get comfortable sitting in guard and being like, well, I'd just elbow him or hit him, you know. And the number of knockouts you actually see from guard, very low nowadays. And hitting people is a great way to sort of make them open their legs and allow you to do stuff. But I think guys get too comfortable in the closed guard. Nobody's getting knocked out in the closed guard in 2016. I had trouble remembering what year it was there, sorry. I was watching Nate Diaz, Conor McGregor 2 again the other night, having found out corner audio is a thing, which is amazing. As soon as Diaz takes him down in the last sort of 15, 20 seconds, McGregor's like huffing and puffing, so the crowd go absolutely nuts when Diaz takes him down. But John Kavanagh in the corner just says it's over, like as soon as he takes him down. Because even if you're knackered, you can stall someone out in your closed guard for, 30, 40 seconds easy. But the guard passing generally not too special in MMA at the moment. To be honest, I think it doesn't help that a lot of the BJJ guys who come over spend so much time training with the gi, or in fact, a lot of MMA guys train with the gi, thinking that'll make their jiu-jitsu better. But if you're relying on the gi a lot, or if you're doing one day of training with the gi and you're like, well, we're training with the gi, might as well have some fun and use the gi. If you get too into doing things like toreador passes, bullfighter passes, which is a misnomer because the bull is supposed to do the moving and the man is supposed to use his feet as little as possible. But if you're getting into the habit of doing passes with gi grips and shit like that, that's not really conducive to your MMA game at all. I mean, of course, there are lots of guys who aren't doing that. There are lots of guys who are absolutely brilliant at pounding guys from the half guard. But generally, I would say getting stuck in the closed guard and then trying to hit people from there rather than trying to advance position. One of my biggest pet peeves. But I also love guard passing. So I'm always going to... Well, you can watch BJ Penn pass guard 10, 15 years ago against Jens Pulver. Still some of the slickest guard passing in MMA. And it shouldn't be like that because everything else has come along so well. Thoughts on Kovalev-Ward? Check out last week. And I still haven't learned how to say Kovalev. Bisping versus Ramiro, how does it play out? Would Jacare be a better or worse fight for Bisping? No, I think Ramiro is probably worse. I think... It'll be interesting to see how a restrained, active, feinting fighter like Bisping can pull out the flaws in Ramiro. Because I don't think anyone's pretending Ramiro is a particularly technically sharp striker. He does swing wild, he does leap through the air to do stuff. And that's the sort of stuff that if you have to do it a lot and you're pushed pace-wise, that's going to tire you out. I know that he ends up breathing heavy by the end of the first round and then always finishes in the third. But in a 5-round fight, that'd be really interesting to see. Obviously, if Bisping survives. I think the cardio is going to be the issue for Romero. If it can be brought to lever against him, then it should be an issue. I want to see how Ramiro deals with a guy who's not just trying to take his head off, a guy who's just going to pity-patter at him and close his eyes up, because that's the sort of guy that's going to give him, should be able to really trouble a guy who's relying on being explosive, making big, primitive moves to get out of the way, as opposed to a guy who's comfortable in the pocket, can defend himself from most stuff. Ramiro's a guy who really overreacts to stuff like that. Like Michael Chandler used to be back in the day. It's great having the reactions to pull your head way out of the way of a jab or a punch. But if you're reacting like that and it takes a huge movement and you have to be sharp and on your game to do it, when you start getting tired and there's more punches coming later on, it really affects your ability to do that. Talking about like action versus reaction, a guy who moves his head a lot and is naturally trying to be evasive of punches tends to fare better in a longer fight, as opposed to a guy who's trying to desperately get out of the way of the punches by reacting. And you can see that in McGregor versus Diaz 1. McGregor's coming forward and reacting to every feint that Diaz shows by like moving his head miles. Would Jacare be a better or worse fight for Bisping? I think maybe. Bisping has very, very good takedown defense. And Jacare is not a particularly complex bag of tricks on the feet, and not a very good counterpuncher either. So I would say that Ramiro is probably the harder fight. Is McGregor a real champion considering he never defended his title? I'm supposed to roll my eyes at this, but what McGregor's done is he's drawn attention to the fact that champion is a vague term. There are guys in the bottom of the top 15 who could come up and might be a perfect stylistic matchup for the champion. It turned out he was a very good stylistic matchup for Eddie Alvarez, who came at him throwing punches and had a bit of a shorter reach, and was perfect for the counter punches. But I don't think any of us think that Nate Diaz would have. Well, we can look at their records, and Nate Diaz has not been as good against high level competition as Eddie Alvarez or someone like that. Donald Cerrone. A few months ago, we were writing him off as like never going to be a big deal in the lightweight division anymore. But Donald Cerrone, horrible matchup for Conor McGregor. Whereas maybe someone who is going to push forward and try and punch like Rafael dos Anjos, not so much. Titles basically came to exist. Well, the idea of a champion is that it's someone who consistently beats opponents. If you give a guy just a shot at the belt off nothing and he wins. He can have the belt, but did he show that kind of consistency? And that's the dangerous thing about getting hung up with belts. Because if you asked me, like, where I rate McGregor as a lightweight, it wouldn't be number one. He's beaten two good lightweights, and one of those was really close. There are a lot of lightweights who have better resumes in that weight class than him. That's not to shit on Conor McGregor at all. That's just to challenge the idea of championships. They mean as much as they mean to the fighter when he wins them. That's about it, This one's from Christopher. Have grapplers had their day? Everyone has some takedown defense nowadays. Do aggressive strikers hold the power? No, they don't. Because every boxing match you ever watch, they fall into the clinch fairly often. It's so hard to avoid the clinch. And this was the success of Ronda Rousey. She can't box. She could barely move her head, but eventually people fall into clinches with her. If you try and throw a power punch and the other guy keeps walking forward, you're going to end up in a clinch. And the guy who owns the clinch owns the fight. If he can't get you down, that's great. You can continue striking. If he can, then you're fucked. Grappling will always be the be-all and end-all like that. You have to be a great striker on top of the grappling. If you're just a grappler without the striking, you can walk forward behind your face, and if you can take a couple of punches, you can probably still win the fight or have a good shot at it. How counterpunching strategies change with advantageous/disadvantageous reach difference. This is an interesting one because, obviously backstep counters like McGregor's are harder against a longer fighter, like Nate Diaz or someone like that. He was landing counters, but he was having to stay on the end of his reach and get out of the way and come back in. Very hard to hit a guy while you're moving backwards if he's longer than you. Typically, if you're the shorter guy, you have to come forward more, move your head more to counter. But if you make the guy come to you and then you step in on him, as long as you've actually moved your head out of the way of the punch, you firstly create the collision, which we always like. T-shirts coming soon. And also you get him to give up his reach. The most common... Well, we were talking about this with Kevin Lee's fight the other day. We were talking about how fighting long is very hard on offense because... as soon as you step in slightly too far, or if you step in with a nice jab and the other guy ducks and steps in, suddenly your reach is gone. Whereas if the guy's coming to you, you can sort of gauge where his head's going to be and you can throw your arm out at him. The other bonus of being a long guy, actually, is that you could land like a counter jab or something like that, And there's a good chance that the other guy will still be in range after the punch. If you're a short guy and you land a nice stiff counter jab or counter right hand against a long guy, he might not even be in range. If he leans back slightly, you're probably not going to get a second punch off. Which is another reason that short guys typically, if you can, counter punch to the body and chest, because they're a lot harder to move out of the way without moving the feet. How much does glove shape and weight affect a fighter's style? Glory seems to make their fighters wear bulky gloves. They seem much larger compared to boxing or Muay Thai match. Probably about the same for most guys. I think they're about 10 ounces, I don't know. But, you know, you know the answer to this. It makes it easier to cover up. It makes it harder to slip blows through between a guy's guard. I would like to see a return to smaller gloves for boxing, things like that. But it does it sort of comes across as a freak show and carries a bit of a stigma now if you try and do like Muay Thai in 4-ounce gloves. But back in Jack Johnson's day, they were using 4-ounce gloves to box with. But, you know, you can never write this off with all this research into concussions and shit. I mean, I've been writing about this for the last couple of weeks, so I've been having to read medical journals and shit. It's super depressing. I was reading about Jerry Quarry, who retired in 1992, and by 1995 he was having to be cared for by his brother and didn't know where he was. Truly harrowing stuff. And the other thing is that, you know, there's guys from his era who took more punches, like George Chuvalo, and is perfectly lucid and well at age 70-something. So, you know, we have no idea how it affects people. But we do know that putting on headgear makes your head heavier as it snaps around on top of your neck, shaking your brain up. And that putting gloves on your hands allows you to hit harder, basically. Because firstly, your hands are heavier, literally. And secondly, you can hit without worry about hurting your fingers. And boxing, Olympic boxing, just dropped headgear for the men based on studies. But I don't know why you would do it for the men first to make them safer while the women keep getting more brain damage. But it's nice that they have actually realised that now. So, you know, we could see smaller gloves come back. It's not completely unthinkable. Though with the ratings on recent boxing pay-per-views, you know, I don't like when people say boxing is dying, but the numbers aren't great. What tactics, guards, and moves from the pre-gloved bare-knuckle days of boxing do you think would be best adapted to MMA? I try to incorporate a lot of this material into my own training, blah, 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 blah. Well, I mean, I'm writing this week about the bull guard, you know, forehead down, taking the punches on the top of your head. Brilliant for MMA, you know. Nick Diaz does that a lot, and KJ Noons broke both his hands on Nick Diaz's head, so always useful. I think the lack of reliance on using your gloves as a shield is one of the most important. And a lot of basic boxing technique is like getting your fists back to your chin or your brow or whatever. I think guys need to learn to use their forearms and shoulders more, bar shots, stuff shots, hands on biceps, things like that. I'd like to see some guys trying to play with the chopper. You know, Artem did the big downward hammer fist the other day, but I think if you could catch and pitch well with that, you know, you could mess some guys' faces up. If you see any of the Kali guys or stuff like that working boxing combinations on the mitts and they're throwing like back fists and shit in the middle, once you see guys like Andrei Arlovsky and whoever fought Jeff Curran that time dropping guys with backhands, you know, it's not unthinkable. You know, maybe guys should be trying that. Any insight into game plan discipline? Many high-level competitors stifle themselves by ignoring their corners. How do the best fighters overcome tendencies to do this? Well, you know, that's the fucking million-dollar question, isn't it? The hardest thing in the world is to listen to someone else and do what they want under fire. But everyone also wants a fighter who will adapt on his own. And this is the difference between the truly elite and the average, or the good. Discipline and the endurance to stay disciplined for rounds. You could get into the late rounds and your discipline starts waning. That's when you're going to get knocked out. When you watch a guy like Manny Pacquiao or someone like that and they're always remembering to step out the side door or move their head after their combinations, that takes years to get down, and most guys aren't going to get it down. Or as soon as they get hit funny or something like that, or they catch one in the breadbasket, or their legs start to cramp up a bit, that's going to be gone. You know, they're going to start swinging or holding or doing something you don't want them doing at that time. I'm not exaggerating when I say, and I have always said this, discipline is the most valuable asset to a fighter, because his corner are absolutely no use to him at all unless he can actually, you know, you're painting through a brush that you can't control as a corner man. It's always going to be fairly vague what comes out on the other side, but the guy who can do it best is going to be the best fighter. Typically. but it also means you need a good corner. I mean, I've seen guys who succeed in spite of their corners. What you're getting in the ring is the culmination of a lot of factors, and you're never sure how much of each is what. If you have a guy who's just there going, yes sir, and doing it all, John Jones, probably not the best behaved person outside of the ring, but he can do exactly what he's told, and that is a very powerful thing to have on your side. Who's next for McGregor? Whoever the fuck he wants. Do the fighters themselves understand the kind of complex combative concepts, alliteration, you talk about, or do they use them instinctively? Or does it vary from fighter to fighter? Also, can I be one of your boys, please? That's from Paul. Paul, you're officially a boy. There's a great line in the song by the Waterboys, Whole of the Moon. It says, I spoke about wings, you just flew. And that's what it feels like when you're a guy who understands the fight game and you're training with a guy who's really good at the fight game. I can get by thinking, okay, this guy does this a lot. Maybe if I push him to the ropes, or I fake him with a fake teep and follow with this, or something like that. And you get a good landing, you'll be like, oh, that worked nicely, let's try that again. The guys who actually are great fighters, they're not thinking what they're going to do, their body's just going, there, punch into that opening or whatever. Principles are important because they are how we train fighters, they are how we understand fighters, they are how we understand what's happening. Whether the fighters understand them themselves, not particularly important for the most part. The ones who think about it and build on it get better and learn to better apply the stuff that they know. But are they specifically thinking about the in and outs as they fight? No. That's what training camp's for. The coach says, this is the stuff we're going to be working towards. We're going to get it into your muscle memory. You don't even need to think about it. Just do what I say. We're going to get good at it. And then hopefully it'll stick with you when you get in the ring. I mean, there used to be people who get really upset about me talking about fight stuff and principles because they were like, the guys don't think about this during the fight. And you're like, no, their coaches do in the months leading up to the fight when they're watching film. That's how this works. Would you recommend sparring with bears? From David. Yes. If you have access to a bear, yeah. If you have access to a bear, you're probably not in a region that has high-tech gyms. So, swings and roundabouts in terms of you might not have a double-ended bag or the best cardio equipment, but you do have a bear. Basic strategy against a swarmer, low-line sidekicks versus teeps. Whichever you're good at. Do you think that stripping McGregor does more damage to the division than simply not defending for X amount of time? Couldn't care less. People who know the division know that it's stacked with talent, and that McGregor probably isn't going to fight there again. People who don't won't care. They'll just tune in for McGregor until he retires. Please explain Dan Kelly and how he keeps upsetting the odds with his dad bod. No idea. Guy's magic. How do you feel about the UFC's policy of regularly booking young and often unbeaten prospects against each other early in their UFC tenures? Good question from Tristan. Well, I've had a think about Max Holloway versus Conor McGregor. So you get these interesting things where you get to see young talent fight. To be honest, I quite like it. I'm not going to lie. I don't like people being built up against people who should lose to them. I like seeing the best fight the best. And if it's the best prospects against each other until they get an established guy, that works for me. It just means that you get these interesting things where a guy might get to a title and the guy who he beat years ago is suddenly coming up as a challenger. But then, MMA is not a knockout tournament. It's not like if you lose to the guy who goes on to win the belt, you can't fight him again. You just carry on your career. Would there be a way to develop a point-based system for MMA? Is it just too subjective to be done properly? Whole thing's too subjective to be done properly. The whole judging system is fucked. If you saw that guy who judged the Sohee Ham fight, gave her no rounds in her previous fight, and then when Mark Hunt fought Stipe Miocic, he didn't score a single 10-8 round in what was basically a prison beatdown. Judging is just terrible, and the judging system is just terrible. What are you going to do? Don't leave it in the hands of the judges. Yeah, you have to have a sense of humour about this stuff because this sport does not work like a normal sport. It doesn't work properly. We just have to deal with it. Do you feel like analysts like yourself who do breakdowns in Killing the King/Queen, Robin Black, BJJ Scout, etc., help push the fighters game forwards and bring the sport to a whole new level? Do you get fighters and coaches who give you feedback on your work? Well, Kevin Lee just weighed in. I get some fighters talking to me. I've got some good relationships with some fighters, guys like Ryan Hall, Bendo, Eddie Alvarez, people like that. But, I'm here to entertain and inform fans. If the fighters find it helpful, that's great. I think BJJ Scout is doing work that will push people forward because the level of BJJ he's talking about is so much higher than MMA. Well, actually, to be fair, the level of striking I talk about a lot of the time is so much higher than MMA. So maybe as a side effect, we are both helping fighters. But, you know, I'm not here to tell fighters or coaches that I know more than them, because I don't. You know, I'm not a professional coach. I'm just here to show other people how beautiful I think things are. I mean, I could be completely wrong, but, you know, it's one of those things where, like, if I'm wrong, I don't want to be right. Does neo striking... oh, no, not answering that. There is no neo striking. There's no neo footwork. It's just, you know, a scale. It's a spectrum. People do stuff. That's it. I'm not going to have things broken down into neo striking and ye olde striking. Your thoughts on Gabi Garcia versus a 100-year-old lady? So I saw this sign, like 50-year-old pro wrestler hadn't fought in 15 years or something like that. Someone said, oh, well, it's Japan. And I was like, well, you do remember that Royce Gracie and Ken Shamrock fought in February on US soil. I feel like people think it's a lot harder to get a shit fight sanctioned than it is. The sanctioning bodies get money for each fight that goes through, and some of them don't really care if people die. So, you know, it's not that hard to get things sanctioned. Of course, in Japan, you can get whatever you want sanctioned because they don't have a MMA governing body. Yeah, it's shit, but, you know, there's no one else for Gabi Garcia to fight. Unless you do the cyborg thing and you ask people from lower weight classes to come up and get their ass whooped. Someone asking for a breakdown of the Brawl for All. No, but I do enjoy watching JBL get knocked out. Nah, he's alright. Could Conor maintain the distance to keep Khabib off him? Am I the only one who thinks the increased fighter bargaining power / unions will degrade the UFC as a fan experience and doesn't care for it? Well, yeah, I mean, Conor could keep him off him. But on to the second question, something I didn't mention when I was talking about biggest obstacle for the UFC at the moment. The Ali Act is an interesting one because it might make it impossible for the UFC to have such long-term contracts with guys. And if you had to rate the two things that the UFC has that really make it better than every other fighting organisation, it's the name power and it's these long contracts with hundreds and hundreds of top-level fighters. If they're doing it for like 2 fights or 1 fight at a time, suddenly it becomes a lot more complicated. Because if someone doesn't like the deal they're offered, they'll go to Bellator. Damian Maia gets bored of waiting for a title fight, goes to Bellator. You know, it's a nightmare for the UFC. Are there any fighters who you think could be top contenders if they made a simple adjustment or added a simple technique to their arsenal? If so, which fighters and what techniques? Justin Scoggins needs to stop shooting into guillotines. Well, yeah, but I think the case with most fighters through history, in fact, always, is that guys get good at things, and no matter how good they are at that thing, it will eventually get them in trouble against another fighter whose style plays into that. I think more fighters need to be thinking specifically about each opponent, things that they need to stop doing for a certain fight, rather than what they can do to beat everyone. Headbutts. Some of us love them, but just how good are they? I have to quietly admit that I loved the headbutt knockout back in the day from Rio Heroes. Headbutts are fucking awesome. I love headbutts. In fact, anytime I'm training neck wrestling or something like that, I'm always thinking, oh, I could just dig in a headbutt there. I don't, because I'm not a knobhead, but it's fun to think about. And frankly, if you are doing neck wrestling or clinch work or anything like that, you can just put your hand there and mime the butt against your hand if you're worried about cutting the other guy open or hurting him or something. But they can make the ground game a lot more static, which, you know, isn't great for MMA. Yeah, I mean, in this age of CTE and worrying about brain damage, it's interesting to remember that the skull is like the hardest bone that you have, and if the other guy punches it, or if you drive it into his face, you know, they're probably going to come off worse. I'm a Patreon boy, please pat my head. Okay, Jacob, you get a pat on the head. Well done, you're a boy. What's the name of your podcast? Fight's Gone By, mate. Get on it. Please tell me you're going to talk about Vasily Lomachenko and his gorgeous footwork. Go read the article I wrote about it a while ago. It's called Pivots and something. But it's just, you know, 100 gifs of him spinning people around, which is, you know, how I'd like to spend my day. How do you think Ronda should approach her fight with Amanda? I think she should run at her. I think Amanda Nunes, as much as everyone wants to claim that she, like, the division has evolved, Amanda Nunes is another fighter who just has a right hand she wants to throw, or a kick she wants to throw, and when she does that, she squares up, which is what Ronda's been thriving on her whole career. People squaring up to throw with power, falling into the clinch. If Ronda can take one punch, and Amanda Nunes is just trying to hit her, then, you know, that's takedown pretty much assured. I mean, I'm not counting out Amanda Nunes' ability to knock people out. Maybe she can wrestle well enough to stop Ronda taking her down. But the idea that Ronda was exposed by Holly Holm is ludicrous. It was flaws we already knew were there, and it was a perfect game plan that exploited them on multiple levels. Perfect in the clinch, perfect out in the open, never giving up the clinch, and then perfect even when she did give up the clinch. I haven't seen Amanda Nunes circle the ring or do anything like that with any of the level of skill that Holly Holm has. So I'm more inclined to believe that this is a test of Nunes rather than Rousey, unless Rousey is completely mentally broken by the loss. Quick check of the Twitter. The guy with the Jack Slack handle, my man Sean, getting upset about people asking him questions. Yeah, I am not Jack Slack on Twitter. I am Jack Slack MMA on Twitter. There is another guy who's a librarian called Jack Slack, and he gets the equivalent of the abuse that John Jones gets from the people who want to abuse me instead. Ooh, prediction on who wins Rico versus Bader. I'm going to do a huge article on this next week because it's a huge fight. I mean, Bader's a bit past it, but it could be a change of direction for kickboxing. You know, the old lion knockout artist versus the new kid on the block. Because they haven't been able to find anyone for Rico to fight, basically. All the old-timers have left, and, you know, when you're fighting Anderson Braddock Silva, who's been knocked out in, like, 4 of his last 6 fights, for the Glory title, that's a little bit embarrassing. The one thing that is making me laugh at the moment is people going, oh, but Bader's obviously on roids. And you're like, well, no, they don't test in this sport. That is why both of them are 250 pounds of muscle with no fat on them, and they have 6-packs. 250-pound men, typically not built like that. They just carry a little bit of extra fat. That's what 250-pound men do. But, you know, people want to believe whoever they want to believe is on steroids. But if you're not testing and you're not on steroids, you're tying your hands behind your back, basically. If you're a matchmaker, how do you see the top? Oh, fuck, not doing that one. Oh, got a question from someone who cornered Ross Pearson. But that's a private message, so I'll actually leave that and I'll answer it to him later. Because Ross is one of my boys. Custard creams or bourbon biscuits? You know what? I think 5 years ago, I'd have said bourbon creams. But maybe it's just now. Right now, I'm in the mood for a custard cream. Turning into one of those guys. If you ever get your guard passed or fail a submission or get hit or something at the gym, or if you're playing football and you can't get to a ball in time, just say 10 years ago I'd have had that. And then everyone will just believe you. Are there any common traits among the Thai who compete at a high level in regular boxing? They're all Thais. No, I mean, I haven't watched an awful lot of lower weight class boxing in quite a while. But typically more southpaws, which is always interesting. There's a good number of southpaws in Muay Thai generally. In fact, in Asia, typically there are a lot more southpaws. I've read a couple of studies into that, or left-handedness rather than southpaw stance. And it's all to do with testosterone in the womb or something like that. I mean, I'm not going to get into it because I'm not a medicine person or a scientist in any way, but the sweetest. But it's interesting how there is an awful lot more left-handedness over in that hemisphere. If you're looking for a Thai boxer, a boxer who is Thai, and another left-hander, and an incredible knockout artist, Kaosai Galaxy, all-time great, one of the best knockout artists of all time, had this amazing left hand. And the weird thing was that he was standing almost square when he threw it anyway. Where a lot of guys with like a big left, a lot of southpaws with a big left hand, they stand very side on so that they've got all that distance to throw it over. But he was almost square and he still managed to knock dudes out with it, which was fairly impressive. Had a brother too who wasn't nearly as successful. Besides Silva, Machida and McGregor, who are some really good counter-strikers? A guy who never really got it together, but understood how to create collisions, was Ryan Jimmo. If you watch his fights, when he's not in the clinch, he did a lot of stalling in the clinch, but he'd back up, and then the other guy would move in and he'd hit him as he was moving in. And he really looked like he was starting to grasp it towards the end of his career. Just really didn't get aggressive enough with it, and was happy to be locked down in the clinch for long periods of time, whereas a guy like Machida would desperately try to get out of the clinch whenever he was locked into it. Anyway, that's an hour of, it's 3/4 of an hour of rapid-fire questions. I quite enjoyed that. We should do that again at some point. Next week I'll get back to regular emails, because I need to sort through some of the ones that I missed for next week. And also, I would appreciate it if you sent me some more emails, because I sort of skipped them for a while, and I don't want you guys thinking that I'm not doing them anymore. So, fightsgoneby podcast@gmail.com. Before we go, just some time to talk about the upcoming fights this weekend. We've got Benavidez versus Henry Cejudo. That's a really good fight. If you look at the experience, Benavidez has fought like murderer's row since his second fight with Demetrius Johnson. Because the way it works in the flyweight division is that you fight nobodies until you fight Demetrius Johnson, and then once they're sure that they can't make any further matches with Demetrius Johnson and you, they give you good fights. Like Ali Bagahutinov and Kyoji Horiguchi basically fought no one of any note until they'd been beaten by Demetrius Johnson. And the same with Henry Cejudo. He is now taking his first sort of high-level opponent, having lost to Demetrius Johnson, which is why the division's failing. But I moan about that all the time. So that should be a really good match. Benavidez has the far superior skill set on the feet and on the ground. Henry Cejudo obviously very skilled in the clinch. Demetrius Johnson did a great job of immediately getting up from underneath Cejudo, so I don't know how well he'll be able to hold down Benavidez. Also, obviously, Benavidez is very famous for the guillotine choke, which, to be fair, Cejudo hits a lot of his takedowns from the clinch, so maybe not so much danger of him shooting into that. Henry Cejudo throws, a half a dozen Superman punches a fight. Joseph Benavidez working with Duane Ludwig, he's one of those guys who's really benefited from working with Ludwig. I don't know much about Master Tong, but he did seem to not really do anything to stop Uriah Faber and guys like that, and Chad Mendes from just throwing the right hand and running in behind the right hand. They never really did much with the Muay Thai that they were training all the time. Then in the co-main event, you've got Ryan Hall versus Gray Maynard. Really interesting fight. I mean, Maynard's chin has really fallen apart lately, but Ryan Hall not really a striker. Very much BJJ-centric game. Or you might get an upside-down shot on one of the best wrestlers in the game, or used to be one of the best wrestlers in the game. I'd be fascinated to see what Ryan can do if he can't take Gray Maynard to the mat. Can he pull guard on Gray Maynard or entangle a leg without Maynard just standing up? We could see a fight where Ryan Hall's forced to stand up, which would be very interesting. He's been developing some interesting kicks lately, but you have to think that's probably not where he wants to be against a guy as experienced as Maynard. Obviously rooting for Ryan because he's one of my boys, but always feel bad if Maynard gets knocked out because he was such an interesting fighter, and then it all just sort of came off the rails. And then you got Jorge Masvidal against Jake Ellenberger. If Masvidal has one problem, it's that he's lovely defense, but he can get trapped in sort of just defending. That was basically how Gilbert Melendez beat him all those years back. He just kept throwing punches. Masvidal would cover up and maybe 1 in 5 punches would connect, but Masvidal wasn't really doing anything back. He's a guy with great defense who gets stuck in the trap of thinking that you can win a fight with defense. Defense prolongs careers, keeps you in the fight. In a sense, defense wins fights, but on the scorecard, defense doesn't win fights. Ellenberger coming off that great body kick. Someone was asking about body hitting setups this week. I think that was in the mailbag, actually. One that I'm really starting to appreciate the value of nowadays is kicking on the back foot against swarmers. Because the moment the pressure comes off, if they just stand in front of you, that kick to the body's perfect. Matt Brown was not dropped by Ellenberger with that, but he also been dropped by Eric Silva the moment he stopped pressuring him. So a decent fight card this weekend, and then we're heading towards UFC 206, which is, getting some negativity around it because of the interim title and the lack of GSP, but it looks like a decent card. And then on to UFC 207 with Ronda Rousey. Way! I'm your boy Jack Slack. I promise I will stop being so busy soon. Christmas is a nightmare. Remember to sign up for the Patreon because we're doing a history episode hopefully next week. And I'll catch you all next week. Cheers.